I'm Michelle Lee, I'm 46 years old. I live in Kellyville in Sydney, and I'm going to be Australia's first female to row solo across any ocean.
One woman, one rowboat, and the Atlantic Ocean.
You throw a cork in a washing machine and have a look at what happens to that cork.
This is the story of Michelle Lee as she attempts to become the first Australian woman to conquer the world's toughest ocean race, the Talisker Whisky Atlantic Challenge.
It's the second biggest body of water on the planet. Covering 20% of the Earth's surface, it measures approximately 41 million square miles.
It's like the old proverbial, needle in a haystack. You're just a blot, a tiny dot on this vast ocean.
I'm Lisa Goddard, and this is Michelle's story.
Bye, Michelle! Good luck, Michelle!
Time.
And with that, Michelle Lee begins her epic adventure to cross the Atlantic. She will row up to 16 hours every day for at least 55 days. Quite a feat for a woman who, until 2 years ago, had never held an oar. She's one of only 5 solo rowers in a fleet of 28 boats.
By the 11th hour, you will be a needle in a haystack. So we separate very quickly, and you've got to remember over 5,000 Ks, your first cruise will come in about 40 days, and then your solos will come in typically between your 60 and 90 days. So, that's a big gap, and it's a lot of nautical miles in between each other. And because we're so low to the waterline, your line of sight, you're lost within, 4 or 5 miles. So you won't have a buddy rowing next to you that you can see or, have a chat to. And, the VHF radio, that only works in line of sight. So if I can't see you, I can't call you either.
You row by looking backwards. So you're going to see these big mothers of 24-foot waves heading towards you. And you're thinking, oh my God. And if they are breaking waves, yes, they can be horrendously, it will scare you. It can scare you. You think, is my boat going to be able to cope with this?
That's Tony Roberts. He's a veteran sailor of over 50 years and is Michelle's designated person ashore, her lifeline should something go wrong.
I know her. I know from the sound and tone of her voice if she's down or if she's up. And, and that's going to depend on the weather and the sea state and everything else out there. So, and she knows I've done the Atlantic. She knows I know the weather, and she has the confidence in me. I've been sailing.
Tony will be an invaluable tool for Michelle. He's crossed the Atlantic himself, but for his trip, he was in a 24-foot catamaran, not a rowboat.
The Atlantic Ocean is, I'll summarise it as saying, is not a very kind ocean from the respect of its weather patterns and how it can change. She is going at the best time of the year. Now, my first 7 days were characterised by 20 to 35 knot winds behind me. So in other words, they were predominantly north to northeast winds, which are good for sailing. But you are running what I call broadside. So the waves are hitting the boat from the side. So you can find yourself in a sailing boat going quite good speeds, but yet it can be like a washing machine because you can get cross seas. In other words, seas built up, predominant swell is from the north, the underlying swell. But you can get wind waves from the east, for example. If the wind is blowing constantly from the east, a wind wave will build up, and therefore you have cross seas, which can toss a boat around. And it tossed my 42-foot catamaran around quite a bit. In a rowboat, just imagine if you throw a cork in a washing machine and have a look at what happens to that cork. So it can be very daunting. And, I mean, if you're not a seasoned maritime person or a sailor or you know, over the oceans, then it can be very daunting. In fact, you can be, you know, get to the point where you can be quite scared.
It sounds downright terrifying.
Yeah, look, it could be. But, you know, when you know what you're doing in a boat, which Michelle does, and she's been at this training now for over 2 years, and you get to know your boat. And she's done, I think, a lot more rowing than your average entrant in this race. And she would be the first one to say that. She's done a lot of rowing. And she knows the boat, she knows the systems, and she knows the equipment. And she knows how to repair anything. She's been dogmatic at doing her research into exactly how the systems work and that she can repair them. And by talking to me, if there is a problem with equipment, we can talk through it and work through it. And if I can't find a solution and she can't, then I will very quickly find the solution by being able to get onto friends of mine and also on the internet.
Tony can hold himself partly accountable for Michelle being where she is right now. It was one of his friends who gave her the book that made her want to row the Atlantic in the first place.
I first met Michelle on a beach in Phuket, of all places, and in 2013. So we struck up a good friendship, and I'm a cruising yachtsman. I have done a circumnavigation. I finished that in November 2017, so 12 years it took me to go around. And in the Bahamas, where the boat was, I encouraged Michelle to drop everything, come and be with me, and cruise around the Bahamas. So she agreed, and I suppose that gave her good exposure to the ocean. And so it was then in the Bahamas that I think it was 2014, a good friend of mine on another cruising yacht, his partner Jean, gave Michelle a book, and the book was Rowing the Atlantic by a lady called Roz Savage. And of course, Michelle read that from cover to cover in no time at all. She was so enthusiastic that she came up one day and just said, I'm going to row the Atlantic.
As you do.
Yeah. Well, I just, you know, like probably a lot of other people who have said the same, I said, expletive, you're mad.
You are not alone.
So, you know, and it's just one of those things where I knew what the Atlantic was like. My crossing was only 15 days on a boat, and but the first 7.5 days were not very pleasant. So that immediately came to my mind, and that's why I said, you know, you're mad. But she's a determined young lady, and she sets her mind to something, and she will achieve it.
Now, it may sound obvious, but Michelle is in a rowboat. She has no sail, no motor. It's just her mental and physical strength that will power her across that open ocean. Other teams have 2, 3, sometimes 4 people on board and are at least able to share the load. But as a solo rower, Michelle has only herself to rely on.
She's everything. Yeah, and with a boat the size of her rowboat, she is going to be in those conditions thrown around a bit. It's going to be hard to just stay in the seat, let alone try and do things with equipment or with the oars or deploy a drogue or anything like that. It's difficult to move around. You know, so it really is. It's a testing time. And it's at that stage where my task is to calm her down, tell her to just try and focus on what it is and how we can overcome and what is the best thing for her to do given the circumstances that she's in. I can't relate. It's so hard because I can relate being out there in a yacht. And it can be, you know, at times where you sit and you think, what am I doing?
Well, I don't understand. How on earth do you prepare for that?
Oh, wow. She's done it. She's done it for the last 2 years. And, I mean, you know, the times that we were out in the Bahamas, we only experienced a couple of situations, and you've got to just be calm. That's the only way you're going to handle it. And by her calling me, I can hopefully go a long way to her achieving a mindset that, yes, she has the capability to handle this. And, yes, stay focused and just calm down and let's work through it, whatever it is. So, yes, that's the only way to do it.
Now, I know from talking to Michelle that the marine life that will be around her is one of the things she's looking forward to, but there is a word or a name that we're not allowed to mention. It starts with S.
Yes.
Do you know what that is?
Yes, I do know what it is, and they can be around, and with recent press and everything else, that yes, it can be very daunting having to go into the open ocean, tether yourself to the boat, and having to get back on the boat, which is no mean feat. You have to be strong in yourself to be able to do that, and it's always in the back of your mind. But you forget about it. You have to forget about it, and you do what you have to do. But she will see dolphins. She will see beautiful dolphin fish, mahi-mahi, dorado, all the one fish. Lots and lots of sea life, particularly at night if there's phosphorescence in the water. Nothing short of total euphoria. And she's likely to get hit in the face by flying fish, which has happened to me numerous times.
What's that like?
Yeah.
It would knock you off your seat.
It just about did. I mean, they're not all that big, but boy, when they hit, because they're flying through the air at the time, they give you an almighty whack, and they are the smelliest fish that you'd ever want to come across. And I find them on my boat in the nets. They get caught up in the nets at the front, and you can just track them down by the smell. For Michelle, I'm sure she's going to find a few